Sometimes what unsettles us most in a case is not only the violence, it's the ordinary life left behind. A meal interrupted, a television still running, a home that still looks lived in, even after everything inside it has changed forever. On September 23rd, 2003, police entered a home in Philadelphia's Crescentville neighborhood expecting to check on a man who missed work. Instead, they walked into a scene that would devastate a family and a community and raise difficult questions about escalation, intrusion, and the way some offenders move through other people's lives as if they have the right. You're listening to Murder in the Black. I'm Steph. September 23rd, 2003 began with concern. Tony Mateos, a coworker of James Cofer's, became worried when James did not show up for his shift in Southwest Jersey's paper factory. That was unusual enough that Tony went to the house to check on him, a good friend. Tony said there were three people living in the home: James, his girlfriend, Patricia, and her daughter, Patricia, nicknamed Nikki. And for the rest of the podcast, I'll be referring to her as Nikki. When Tony got there, the back door was open. That immediately struck him as suspicious. He did not go inside. He also noticed Patricia's car was still there, which made the whole situation feel even stranger. So Tony did what he felt was safest. He alerted police. When officers arrived, they entered the residence through the basement and went upstairs into the main living area. Inside, the television was on. There was pizza on the table. The scene looked as if life had been moving along normally until something interrupted it. Police announced themselves several times throughout the home, but there was no response. At the top of the stairs, an officer saw a female body on the ground with a blanket over it. He called immediately for backup. In another bedroom, police discovered a male in bed, also covered with a blanket, and he appeared to be deceased as well. Emergency medics were called to the scene along with detectives. The Crescentville neighborhood was considered safe, and the discovery took everyone by surprise. The female found upstairs was identified as Nikki Stallworth. She had been shot once in the head. In the front bedroom, Patricia Henry's boyfriend, James Cofer, was found in bed. There was blood coming from the head of both victims. Faces were covered. That detail stood out immediately to investigators, and this is one of those points where the scene begins to say more than people may realize. There is no single explanation for why offenders cover a victim's face or head. Behavioral evidence is rarely that neat. But forensic psychologists have often discussed victims' covering as something that can suggest emotional conflict, shame, distancing, control, depersonalization, or a personal connection. Sometimes it reflects an inability to look at the victim after the fact. Sometimes it's an effort to create distance from what the offender has done. And oftentimes it suggests that the victim was not just a random object to them, but a real person whose humanity had to be blocked out after the fact. And then there's times where it's just a part of the offender's own ritual or instinct. But it gave detectives something to think about. Did the killer know the victims? Was this personal? A family member? A former romantic partner? A crime of passion? Or was the face covering misleading them entirely? At that point, they really didn't know. They also noticed what the house did not suggest. It did not appear to be a robbery. The place was not ransacked. Items were out of place, but not in a way that suggested someone had torn through the home looking for valuables. Food and drinks were still out. The environment felt interrupted, not overturned. Detectives began trying to reconstruct what may have happened. They believed maybe Nikki was eating pizza in the living room when the doorbell rang or when someone knocked. Then she opened the door and someone either pushed their way in or she invited them in. In the kitchen, investigators noticed an extra can of Coke. Now, depending on where you're from, you might call it soda or pop. And in Texas, we say Coke because everything's a Coke, even if it's a Sprite. Finding a Coke on the counter, an extra can, doesn't necessarily mean anything in normal circumstances. But as we've learned through many episodes of Murder in the Black, those small details, they tend to mean something. And they could be the very thing that may crack the case. So they made sure to collect fingerprints from anything that seemed relevant, including the extra can of Coke they found in the kitchen. While police continued processing the home, detectives had to begin notifying family members. I want you to know, inside of the community of Crescentville, as police were outside of the home walking back and forth, many people began to accumulate outside of Patricia's home. And one of those people was Patricia's sister, Marilyn Henry. Police came outside and identified who was a part of the family. And Marilyn was told that there were two bodies inside the home and they were deceased. Her immediate response was not procedural, it was personal. She asked, "Where was Patricia?" Marilyn knew Patricia's car was there as she saw it on scene. So when she saw police going in and out of her sister's home, she called her sister, but she didn't get an answer. So the question became, if two bodies had already been found, but Patricia had not been named, then where was she? The question changed the emotional temperature of the case. Now, there was not only confirmed horror, there was uncertainty. Patricia was not accounted for. Her car was at the house, her phone was not being answered, and still, somehow, she was missing from the story detectives could explain so far. That kind of uncertainty creates a different kind of dread. Was she somewhere else in the house? Had she left? Had she come home and then gone back out? Was she hurt? Was she alive? That no one around the family had those answers yet. As Marilyn kept insisting that Patricia should have been there, detectives went back into the home and looked more carefully into the basement. There, they noticed a pile of clothes. They also saw an area rug rolled up. When they unfolded it, they found Patricia Henry. She had been shot, like James and Nikki. And just like that, the last uncertainty gave way to something even more devastating. Patricia was dead too. Investigators believe the killer had gone to significant efforts to hide her body, apparently hoping she would remain hidden. That detail added another disturbing layer to the case. This was not simply someone firing shots and fleeing. This was someone who stayed, someone who made decisions after the killings, someone who moved Patricia, rolled her up in a rug, and covered her up with clothes. That suggested time. It suggested effort. And it suggested a chilling level of composure after the violence. The family was notified that Patricia, too, had been killed. And that is the point where the full shape of the loss comes into view. Because until then, there was still that terrible sliver of uncertainty around Patricia, a question where an answer should have been, a fragile hope. However, unlikely that maybe she was not one of the dead, but she was. Patricia Henry and Nikki Stallworth had built their lives in that Crescentville home for over 10 years. It was not just a house. It was where their routines and habits lived, their family identity, their everyday safety. Patricia had been widowed at an early age and was raising her daughter, Nikki. Later, she met James Cofer. According to the family, they met on a cruise for Patricia's sister's birthday. Very quickly, they fell in love. James got along with Nikki, which is always a saving grace, and the family loved him. He fit well into their dynamic effortlessly. And about a year before the murders, he had moved into the home. By all appearance, they were happy and they were living a pretty moderate life, enjoying one another. And I think it's worth staying with that for a moment. Because when we hear that three people were killed inside one home, the mind can flatten them into one tragedy. But inside that house were three distinctive lives, connected in different ways. There was Patricia, a woman who had already known deep loss and still kept building. And there was Nikki, a 15-year-old honor student, still in the stage of life where routine can look so ordinary from the outside. School, friends, coming home, grabbing food, moving through the week, and yet that ordinariness is its own precious thing. And there was James, who was not just Patricia's boyfriend in a technical sense, but someone the family had embraced, someone who had folded into their daily life so naturally that he had become a part of the structure of the home. That is the part of what makes this case heavy. It was not an isolated life interrupted. It was a whole domestic world, a mother and daughter, a partner who had become family, a household with its own rhythm and routines. And that's why the details in the house hit so hard. The television is on. The pizza is still there. Drinks are downstairs. Those are not just eerie scene details. They are evidence that life was in motion. The shock of losing one loved one is life-altering. Losing three? From the same household, in the same act of violence, is the kind of trauma that tears through a family and community all at once. Detectives asked Marilyn and other family members if she knew anyone who might be responsible, but no one in the family could name an obvious suspect. So police began canvassing the area. One neighbor mentioned a man named John. According to the neighbor, Patricia had once had a brief relationship with him after meeting him at work. They were still cordial. The neighbor said she had seen John come and go from the house with a key, even though Patricia was in another relationship. That raised concern immediately because there had been no signs of forced entry. In a case like this, a former romantic partner with possible access to the house is someone detectives have to speak with. The neighbor could not remember the last time she had seen John, but police now had a name: John Boston. Detectives went to his home with the help of his landlord. They knocked, and if John didn't answer, the landlord would open the door. They knocked on the door, and no one came. But detectives noticed a foul odor coming from inside. They were intrigued. They entered carefully, weapons drawn, unsure of what they would find. Inside the home, it was in disarray. With moldy food on the counter, the odor came from spoiled food, not a body. They needed to locate John. Eventually, detectives found out he was in the hospital from a neighbor. They made their way to the hospital and spoke with him. He claimed he had suffered a stroke and was in rehab, which is why his home was in disarray and food was left out, molded over. Physically, he was unable to get around. He said he found out about Patricia and Nikki's murder on the television and claimed he loved both of them deeply. He said him and Patricia ended up going their own separate ways, but it was cordial. He said they broke up because he was out of Patricia's league. He was older and sicker, and the relationship ended. When detectives asked about the key, he said he had given it back to Patricia, and the only reason why he had it was to pick up his mail because he once lived there. Most importantly, he said he had been in the hospital during the murders, and that was confirmed. John was no longer a suspect. But John also gave detectives a small detail that stayed with them. He said Patricia was neat, clean, and orderly, and that one reason their relationship ended was because he was messy and she wasn't. That might sound minor, but it changed how investigators looked at the scene when they found it. Because downstairs they had seen pizza in the living room, Coke cans out, and items not put away. That did not seem like the Patricia John described. And so their initial theory that Nikki was sitting down eating pizza and that maybe someone knocked on the door turned into something that was more plausible and less connected to Patricia. Detectives went to Nikki's school, the Philadelphia High School for Creative and Performing Arts. They spoke with friends, teachers, and classmates. Nikki was a sophomore honor student. People had good things to say about her personality and her character. She got along with everyone. Detectives dug through Nikki's life looking for problems, conflicts, tension, or who may have had, or anyone who may have wanted to harm her. They found no obvious issue. They also ran a criminal background on James and found nothing significant. At that stage, detectives had to consider another possibility. Maybe this was not someone deeply tied to the family. Maybe it was a stranger. And there was another reason they were open to that idea. At the time, there had been a string of murders throughout Philadelphia. Two couples had been shot in their homes, and both of those murders occurred within about a 10-mile radius of Patricia's residence. That raised a disturbing possibility. Could detectives be dealing with a serial killer? This is where they began looking for a common theme and design. And when investigators compare cases like this, they are looking for patterns. Were the victims chosen in a similar way? Were they in the same type of neighborhood? Was there forced injury? What kind of weapon was used? Did the offender stay at the scene? Were the bodies positioned similarly? Was there sexual assault? Did the offender move or cover the victims? Was there staging? Were there repeated habits in how the violence unfolded? That's what detectives mean when they are looking for common theme and designs. Those are the kind of questions they're asking themselves. That kind of comparison helps investigators decide whether different crimes may point to the same offender or whether similar looking scenes are actually unrelated. And in a stretch like this, uncertainty creates its own pressure. Because if detectives were dealing with a serial offender, that would mean the danger had not ended with this house. But they also had to be careful not to force pattern where one did not exist. So you have to be very careful when you're looking for common theme and design. It comes with a particular analysis. As they're looking through these different cases and trying to find a trend, the forensic evidence began coming back. One of the fingerprints found on the Coke can in the living room belonged to a man named Sean Brown. And detectives learned another devastating detail. The killer had sexually assaulted 15-year-old Nikki. At that point, police already knew Sean Brown. He had committed robberies in the past. He had been placed on probation. He had cut off his monitoring bracelet and was now on the run. So it wasn't going to be so easy to track him down. And the case began to shift from finding the common themes and design within the previous cases where couples had been killed in their home to now focusing their attention on Sean Brown. They hadn't totally released that these different cases where people were found in their home were related, but since they had the fingerprints of Sean Brown, they naturally shifted speaking to him. So now detectives were no longer looking only at former boyfriends, family connections, or a possible serial offender. They were looking at a known offender with a robbery history, an active probation violation, and a fingerprint inside the home. They went to Sean's father, hoping to find out where he was. His father was cooperative. He said he had kicked Sean out of the house because he was going in the wrong direction. He could no longer tolerate his behavior. That is a small detail, but it says a lot. Families often see decline before the rest of the world fully understands it. They may not know exactly what a person is capable of, but they know something is wrong. Sean's father directed detectives to a friend's home near his mother's house. Police went there with a warrant. They searched the home and found nothing at first, but then they went out to the garage. And there, they found Sean Brown hiding in the darkness of the garage. He was arrested because, of course, he had that probation violation, a good reason to hold him. And according to detectives, he did not seem surprised that they were looking for him. Once they had him in custody, detectives began building rapport. Sean initially acted as if the issue was his ankle monitor, as if maybe they were there because he cut it off. But detectives told him this was about the murders of Nikki, Patricia, and James. And under immense pressure, Sean Brown confessed. He said he committed all three murders. According to his statement, he said that he saw Nikki coming home after getting off the bus. She had purchased a pizza. He approached her and threatened her with a gun. She believed that it was just going to be a simple robbery and that he would leave. Instead, he forced her inside and raped her. He constantly asked Nikki as they were going inside of the home if anyone else was there, and she insisted no one was there. So he takes her upstairs to the bedroom after raping her, claiming that he wanted to lie down with her. As they get upstairs, he discovers James is in the house lying in his bed asleep. Sean went over and killed James while he was sleeping. Then, because Nikki had screamed, afraid that maybe she had brought attention to the house, he turned the gun on her and shot her in the head. After that, he remained in the home. He ate pizza, drank a soda, and watched football on the television. That sequence is one of the most chilling parts of this case. It suggests occupation, a kind of psychological insertion into someone else's domestic space, not just taking the life of two individuals, but then settling into the environment afterward, consuming what belonged to the victims, moving through their routines as if he had the right to be there. And I think that is one of the less obvious things this case leaves behind. Sometimes the most disturbing part is not only the murder. Sometimes it's the way an offender treats the victim's world afterward as something to use, inhabit, rearrange, and leave behind. Then Patricia came home. At some point, Sean heard a noise coming from the basement. He shot Patricia as well, and he rolled her up in a rug and covered her with clothes. 19-year-old Sean Brown was charged with the murders of Patricia Henry, Nikki Stallworth, and James Cofer. Investigators did not connect him to any of the murders they had examined. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. This is where I think this case asks us to reflect on something deeper than the obvious horror. Because the easiest way to tell this story is to say a violent young man entered a house, committed unspeakable acts, and destroyed 3 lives. That is true. But if we stop there, we miss some of the harder questions attached to a case like this. One of those questions is about escalation. Sean Brown was known for robberies. He had been on probation, cut off his monitoring bracelet. He was already on the run. Those facts can be told as background, but they can also be understood as part of a pattern. Repeated disregard for limits, repeated willingness to violate other people, repeated evidence that rules and consequences were not enough to restrain him. That does not mean every person who steals becomes a killer, but it does invite us to think about how some offenders move across categories people prefer to keep separate. Theft, predatory behavior, sexual violence, trespassing, probation violations, homicide. Sometimes those are not separate moral boxes. Sometimes they are expressions of the same underlying willingness to use other people's lives for personal impulse, control, thrill, or gratification. And I think that is one of the less obvious factors worth sitting with here. Another is the meaning of ordinary disorder. The pizza, the Coke cans, the television on. Those details are haunting because they're ordinary, not dramatic, not symbolic in an obvious way, but they tell us that life was happening there. Hunger, rest, school, work, family routine, a house moving through an ordinary day, just like you and me. And then violence entered that routine and corrupted it completely. So for me, the unsettling center of this case is not just that someone entered a home. It is that he moved through the intimate grammar of everyday life and treated it like it belonged to him. He did not only attack people, he occupied their routines. He inserted himself into their private world. And when you look at it that way, the Coke can becomes more than a clue. The television becomes more than background noise. They become markers of an offender who was deeply comfortable violating the boundaries of other people's ordinary existence. There's also something worth noticing in how this case was solved. It wasn't one dramatic moment, but by ordinary attentiveness. A coworker noticed James miss work and cared enough to check. Let that sit with you. Cared enough to check. Didn't rationalize it, decided that he would get in his car and go knock on the door. Patricia was found because a sister kept asking, where was she? This was not like her. A neighbor remembered a former boyfriend with a key. A former partner described Patricia's habit in a way that helped detectives read the scene differently or affirm what they initially thought in the first place. A fingerprint on a Coke can connected the home to an offender. A father told the truth about his son's decline. Cases often come together that way, through accumulated details and people who refuse to ignore what feels off. So before I close, I want to leave you with two questions. First, when someone shows a repeated pattern of violating boundaries through theft, intimidation, disregard for rules, or predatory behavior, at what point should we stop treating those acts as isolated problems and start seeing them as signs of deeper capacity for harm? Because I think in the case of Sean, a lot of people capitulated to the fact that he was young, rationalized it, and thought that with correction, it would get better. But it didn't. Do we give too much grace to young people after continued patterns of abuse? In a case like this, what lingers with you more? The brutality of the crime itself, or the ordinary details left behind reveal how completely someone inserted himself into the victim's everyday world? Patricia Henry, Nikki Stallworth, and James Cofer should all still be here. Nikki was a 15-year-old honor student with people around her who spoke highly of her character. Not even some adults would be talked about like Nikki. Patricia built a life for herself and her daughter and was described as neat, loving, and grounded. James had become part of that family's daily life and was loved by all of them as well. Their home was not just a location, it was a shared life. And on September 23rd, 2003, that shared life was destroyed. John Brown was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, but no sentence can restore what this family lost. A mother was hidden in her own basement. A teenage girl was sexually assaulted and murdered. A man was killed in his bed, asleep. And when police arrived, the house still held the evidence of everyday life. The television on, pizza out, the drink downstairs. All reminders that just hours before, this was still a home where people were living and expecting another ordinary day. Before we close today's episode, I want to take a moment to move into our segment called True Crime and Current News, a space where we look at cases that are still unfolding in real time, not just the stories that have already settled into hindsight, not cases that have already been shaped into a documentary arc, but the ones families and communities are still actively living through, where answers may still be incomplete, court dates are still ahead, and grief is still very fresh. And I think that always changes the way we should talk about these stories, because when a case is still moving, people are not reflecting from a distance. They are enduring it in real time. One of our listeners named China reached out to me and asked me to share the story of her best friend. Today, we're going to Warren, Ohio, where loved ones are grieving the loss of 46-year-old Vontisha Monique Williams, a woman who was affectionately known as Sway. According to local reporting, Warren police responded to a shots fired call around 2 a.m. on April 14th, 2026, in the 2000 block of Northwest Boulevard. Investigators say officers found bullet holes in the front door of the home. Inside, they located a juvenile victim in the living room and Vontisha Williams in the basement. Both were taken to the hospital for treatment. 2 days later, on April 16th, Vontisha died from her injuries. And as of the latest reporting, the case remains under investigation with no suspect in custody. In the days after her death, family and friends gathered at Packard Park for a balloon release in her memory. And I always think moments like that tell us something that the first headlines usually cannot. They remind us that before a person becomes a part of a crime story, they are a part of a family story. They belong to people. They are woven into routines, traditions, responsibilities, and memories that existed long before the public ever heard their name. Loved ones describe Vontisha or Sway as a kind hearted mother and a grandmother with a bright smile and generous spirit. She was also remembered as a sister, niece, cousin, and friend, someone whose presence touched many different parts of other people's lives. She was also the owner of Sway's Kitchen, a business she reportedly operated in Warren for several years. And I think that is one of the hardest truths in active cases. The public is often introduced to a person through the worst thing that could ever happen to them. But the people who love them are carrying a much fuller story. They're remembering how she laughed, how she showed up, what she built, and what she meant. They're remembering phone calls, everyday responsibilities, family roles, the small pieces of a life that never make it into an official update. As of the latest reporting, Warren police are asking anyone with information to contact Detective Sergeant Michael Alterier at 330-841-2749. Information can also be provided anonymously through the department's tip line. I want to extend my deepest condolences to China and to everyone mourning Vontisha Sway Williams. Rest in peace. Now, I want to shift to Los Angeles, California, where the case involving 14-year-old Celeste Hernandez continues to unfold. Now, I have given several updates surrounding this case, but I do not take it for granted that although this is a very public case, I don't think that means everyone knows everything there is to know about it. And this will be probably my second time giving an official updates on our platform that goes everywhere. I've given several updates on our social media. I don't want to neglect those who may not know the timeline. So let's talk about it for a second. On April 16th, 2026, David Anthony Burke, the 21-year-old musician known professionally as David, was arrested by LAPD in connection with Celeste's death. Authorities said he was being held without bail, so from the beginning, this was treated as an extremely serious case. Then on April 20th, the Los Angeles County District's Attorney Office announced that Burke had been charged with capital murder, along with one count of continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14 and one count of mutilation of human remains. He entered a plea of not guilty. On April 22nd, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner publicly confirmed that Celeste died from multiple penetrating injuries to the torso and ruled her death a homicide. In late April, prosecutors filed documents that added even more disturbing allegations to the picture they are building. According to those filings, investigators uncovered alleged purchase records for items including a shovel, two chainsaws, a body bag, heavy duty bags, and a blue inflatable pool. Prosecutors also allege that Celeste's left ring and pinky fingers were amputated and that her ring finger contained a tattoo of David's name. This is the most recent update. On May 12th, Burke appeared in court in downtown Los Angeles for a status hearing. During that hearing, the court moved the case forward on a new timeline setting, June 17th, for another status conference and June 29th for the preliminary hearing. Part of the reason for that delay appears to be the sheer amount of evidence involved. Reports say that discovery in this case includes roughly 40 terabytes of material. And just to put that into perspective, because I didn't know how much that was other than people on the internet constantly saying how much it was, a terabyte is a massive amount of digital storage. So 40 terabytes is not a handful of files or a single stack of evidence. It is the kind of volume that can hold millions of documents, photos, videos, messages, location records, and forensic extractions. In other words, investigators are working through a huge digital trail, not just one box of evidence. And I think that is one of the defining realities of how cases like this are now built. Investigators are no longer reconstructing only what happened at the scene. They're reconstructing choices, timelines, movements, searches, messages, purchases, routes, behaviors before and after the fact. Technology is now one of the most damning things when it comes to cases and has been for a while because technology is ever evolving and your digital footprint never truly goes away. All of it is layered together to tell the story that the prosecution believes can show planning, intent, concealment, and aftermath. To me, that is one of the more unsettling realities of current cases like this. You are not just hearing what prosecutors say happened, you are hearing how they believe a person moved through time while it was happening. Now, the June 29th preliminary hearing will be a major next step because that is where prosecutors will need to present enough evidence to show the case should move forward toward trial. Now, if you guys remember, I did a mini deep dive of the Naziah Harris case, and I took you through all of the evidence that was presented at the preliminary hearing. I know there's somebody saying, okay, girl, you giving me a lot of information. What does that mean? Well, in terms of next steps, we really need to be looking at the preliminary hearing because that's when we'll know exactly what the prosecutors are going to present if they go to trial. And I think with 40 terabytes, they have something. At the same time, the district's attorney's office has not yet made a final public decision on whether it will seek the death penalty or pursue life without parole under the special circumstance allegation attached to the case. As this case continues to go down the path of eventually going to trial, I will update you and let you know. Now, before we go, I do want to provide a brief update. Back in 2025, Austin Metcalf, a 17-year-old Frisco Memorial High School student, was killed on April 2nd during a track meet at David Stadium in Frisco, Texas. Now, prosecutors say Carmelo Anthony, who was also 17 at the time, fatally stabbed Austin during an altercation at the event and has since been charged with murder. Anthony has pled not guilty, and his trial is currently scheduled to begin on June 1st of 2026 in Collin County. Our recent reporting also indicates the court has already put media rules in place ahead of what is expected to be a closely watched trial. Now, I've told you guys before that I am in the Frisco area. When this case unfolded, we updated you guys, talked about it a little bit on our podcast, but I am trying to make sure that I am inside that courtroom to give you weekly updates about the trial and do everyday updates as the trial unfolds on our social media platforms. So I just want to put it out there that that trial is set to start on June 1st. And since I am local, I will be trying to do as highlights and updates concerning this case because it is very controversial and it's literally right in my backyard. If this episode stayed with you, take a moment and share it. Share the story of Patricia Henry, Nikki Stallworth, and James Cofer with someone who values thoughtful true crime, someone who believes these names deserve to be spoken with care, and these lives deserve to be remembered with intention. Every share matters, and every time you pass an episode along, you help this work reach the people it's meant to reach. And if there's a case you think I need to know about for true crime and current news, send it my way. If there's a story unfolding in your city, a case that is not getting enough attention, or something you feel deserves to be a part of this space, reach out through DMs or by email. I always want this platform to leave room for stories people are still actively living through, not just the ones the headlines decide to hold on to. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Murder in the Black YouTube channel so you don't miss new episodes, current news updates, and everything else we're building together. Subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing all help this platform grow, and I truly appreciate every bit of support you all show. And if you've been hearing me mention what I didn't see, I want to explain a little bit more about what that is. What I Didn't See is my psychological thriller audio series. It's a different kind of storytelling space, one built around suspense, tension, atmosphere, and the unsettling places the mind can go. It's immersive by design. It's darker in tone, and it's made for listeners who want to step into something layered, cinematic, and deeply psychological. So while Murder in the Black holds space for real stories, real people, and real cases, What I Didn't See lets me move into a different lane creatively, but also provides the same suspense and psychological pull that you hear in my storytelling on our weekly episodes. I released the first episode of What I Didn't See on May 10th. If you listen to that episode and you want more, the only place to continue the series is on our paid subscription platform. So if you've been wanting access to that series, that's where you'll find it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with care. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.